Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. Ukraine is facing challenges on all fronts. Not only is the country dealing with a major corruption scandal which saw 2 ministers resign today, but now Russia claims control over the majority of one of Kyiv's last strongholds in Donbas, Pokrovsk. More on that in just a moment, but first, more top stories of today. Romania and Bulgaria raced against time to take over Russian assets before U.S. sanctions enter into force. Poland files for an exemption from the solidarity mechanism included in the EU's Migration Pact. And Allied forces test how fast NATO can respond in case of Russian aggression amid the U.S. troop reduction in Romania. And we begin today's show with the latest developments in Ukraine. In a dramatic shift, after over a year of continuous fighting, Russia claims to have taken Pokrovsk while disseminating videos of truly post-apocalyptic scenes from the city. Regardless of Russian fear-mongering, President Zelenskyy says Ukrainian forces in the region persevere. Defense correspondent Zuzanna Jurek has more in her report.
Scenes that echo the landscapes of a Mad Max film. Russian forces storming the city of Pokrovsk in Ukraine's Donetsk region. On Tuesday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy insisted that despite the difficulties, Ukraine will persist.
The situation there is difficult, particularly due to weather conditions that are conducive to attacks. But we continue to destroy the occupiers.
But experts say that determination alone will not make up for Kiev's reduced offensive capabilities as winter draws nearer.
One of the major downsides of this Ukrainian drone wall is that when it's rainy, windy, or foggy, the efficacy of Ukrainian drones really goes down. And the Russians have actually been exploiting crummy weather to make these advances. Pokrovsk is going to fall. The city's been compromised, and it's really a question of time.
And the time appears to be now, at least as Russia claims territorial control over the vast areas of the city and nearby areas. Pokrovsk, seen as the gateway to Donetsk, would be an important symbolic victory for the Kremlin, which has been trying to capture the area for nearly 21 months, whilst incurring increasingly heavy losses.
They have given up tens of thousands of troops and billions of dollars in military equipment to make a claim that they're making today.
This comes at a time when Washington is allegedly seeking to dilute the language of the UN resolution on Ukraine, the diplomatic mainstay of international support for Kiev, by removing the references to territorial integrity and aggression from the document. Though, as the president of the 80th session of the UN General Assembly points out on TVP World's On the Record, a UN majority will insist on respect for Ukraine's territorial integrity.
The Charter is their life insurance because most of the countries do have a bigger neighbor, and they know if they would accept the violation of international law, if they would tolerate a war of aggression, then no country could sleep in future in silence.
Last December, the US joined 77 other countries in voting for the measure, which passed with 78 votes in favor. As the Humanitarian Committee deliberates over the next few weeks, it will become clear whether Washington will remain on the side of holding Russia accountable for its war crimes. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
People are still dying every week.
And we will have the full interview with the President of the United Nations General Assembly, Annalena Baerbock, right after this show, so stay tuned. And we stay in Ukraine, but we shift our focus to an erupting corruption scandal that is claiming more victims. As we've learned, Ukraine's justice and energy ministers handed in their resignations as a result of the clampdown by National Anti-Corruption Bureau. The case also involves President Zelenskyy's close ally, Timur Mindic. Kazimierz Łysiak reports on the renewed scrutiny of Zelenskyy and his administration.
This is shaping up to be the biggest corruption scandal in Ukraine since the start of the Russian invasion. Ukrainian Justice Minister and former Energy Minister Herman Halushchenko was suspended by the Prime Minister on Wednesday over his potential involvement in embezzling some $100 million of public money, and while he appears to have taken it on the chin.
I am not clinging to the position of minister. I believe that suspension during the investigation is the civilized and correct course of action.
There are some, including former President Petro Poroshenko, who have been calling for the minister's resignation. This was echoed by President Zelenskyy on Wednesday.
I have asked the Prime Minister to ensure that they tender their resignations and call on members of Parliament to support this decision.
Soon after that appeal, Galushchenko, alongside the current Energy Minister Svitlana Hryntchuk, both submitted their resignations. The embezzlement was allegedly done through the procurement of favorable contracts in the nuclear company Energoatom and other state-owned energy firms. But the case does not stop with Minister Galushchenko.
It's about not just embezzling of funds at the state energy company, it's also about organized criminal group, which was coordinated by Timur Midic, who happens to be the business partner of President Zelenskyy.
There are at least 7 high-profile suspects in total so far. The investigation into the case is led by NABU, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. Its investigators are pointing to Timur Midic as instrumental to the scheme.
Taking advantage of the situation in Ukraine under martial law, his friendly relations with the current president of Ukraine, and his connections with current and former senior government officials, he decided to enrich himself illegally.
The timing of the scandal is not doing President Zelenskyy any favors either. It comes as Russia is intensifying its attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, once again aiming to weaponize winter. It also comes just over 3 months after Zelenskyy attempted to limit the operations of NABU, a move met with massive protests in the country and from the European Union. He reversed the decision soon after, but some are now claiming that he was trying to keep the scandal from surfacing.
That attack on NABU and SAPO was connected and related to also this investigation, because at that moment NABU and SAPO charged the former Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine, Chernyshov. And this Vice Prime Minister just yesterday received another charge.
And as the European Commissioner for Enlargement told TVP World last week, the EU was left with a bitter taste in its mouth.
Has the trust been repaired between Brussels and Kyiv? I remember when this happened and the condemnation coming out of the Belgian capital was quite strong.
You know, how is it with the trust? What happened in July has harmed the trust.
The investigation into the scandal is ongoing, so it's unclear how, if at all, it will affect Ukraine's EU accession bid. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
And now more from Brussels on the contentious issue of the Migration Pact. Warsaw has filed for an exemption from the solidarity mechanism included in the EU's Migration Pact to avoid being obliged to accept quotas of migrants from other member states. Poland is among 6 countries eligible for an exemption because of their difficult migratory situation. Our correspondent in Brussels, Angela Skujins, joins us now with more details. Good evening, Angela. So will Warsaw not be forced to accept migrants?
That is yet to be seen. The European Commission does not hold the power. The European Council does. This is the 27 EU heads of state. They will meet again in December and vote on whether Poland can be fully exempt from participating in this policy. European Commissioner for Migration Magnus Brunner announced yesterday that Poland was among half a dozen European countries allowed to apply to be partially or fully exempt from the migratory scheme. The Commission did publish some information regarding migration. It has fallen 35% over the past year. However, challenges remain. The Polish government on Wednesday, led by the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, outlined their key arguments as to why they want to be fully exempt from this policy.
For months, we have been saying that there is no agreement on any relocation mechanisms. Poland bears enormous costs in protecting the European Union's borders, is under migration pressure from Belarus, and has taken in war refugees from Ukraine. Crucially, the decision to allow such a proposal means protection for many years, not just 1 year. This is what we promised, and we have kept our word.
Jean Kierwiński with a statement. How does this declaration from Warsaw chime with what Brussels wants?
Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, the EU Commissioner Chief Magnus Brunner announced yesterday that Poland has been identified. He stated that the country has been under significant strain from the past 5 years, hosting the lion's share of displaced Ukrainian people. According to EU data, 1.8 million Ukrainians currently reside in Poland. This is almost 1/4 of the EU's total. We also heard him citing the weaponization of migration, something that the Polish government has also claimed. The Commissioner litigated this policy today to members of the European Parliament, and he outlined 3 key factors in determining whether a country should be exempt or whether they should get more support from the EU for hosting these migrants and asylum seekers.
First of all, the pressure of illegal crossings along the Mediterranean routes. Secondly, the support member states have shown to Ukraine in the form of temporary protection. And thirdly, the challenges of strained reception systems or the threat of weaponization of migration.
So there is still quite a bit of controversy regarding this plan, expected to kick in from June next year. We are expected to see those decisions being made at that summit in December, but it is far from true to say that the border clashes are over. Back to you, Claudia.
Thank you very much, Angela. That was Angela Skujins reporting live from Brussels. A big day in Czech politics as the incoming Eurosceptic Prime Minister Andrej Babiš met with President Petr Pavel today to discuss the formation of a new government, which includes 2 far-right parties. But the president has voiced concerns about Babiš's plans for security and defense. Our correspondent in Prague, Andrew Sweeney, has more.
Czech President Petr Pavel met with the incoming Prime Minister Andrej Babiš today to discuss the new government's programme as well as the nomination process for its new ministers.
A governing coalition agreement between Babiš's Anno party, the far-right SPD and the populist newcomers the Motorists came into effect on November 3rd. However, the Czech government has yet to be formed, as the ruling parties must still nominate individuals for ministerial posts. The process has already caused a scandal due to the nomination of Motorist MP Filip Turek as foreign minister.
That these smaller political parties are not so much interested in their political program as they are interested in lucrative ministerial posts. But it is still incredibly controversial because these people are absolutely incompetent.
Another sticking point is the government's programme. President Pavel is reportedly concerned that it lacks any mention of the international security situation, support for Ukraine or Russia as a strategic threat. The SPD, led by Speaker of the Parliament Tommy Okamura, has long campaigned to leave NATO and supports closer ties with Russia. Babiš said after a meeting today that he would take the President's comments under advisement.
I will convey his opinion to our coalition partners, based on which we will add some formulations to the government's programme statement or not.
Pavel is also reportedly concerned about a potential conflict of interest over Babiš's ownership of Agrofert, a chemical and agricultural conglomerate that has been awarded state contracts. After the meeting with the President, Babiš emphasised that he would deal with the Agrofert case in accordance with the opinions of the Czech courts.
Andrej Babiš says he expects the new government to be in place by December 17th. However, it's worth remembering that President Pavel does have the right to reject any of the nominees put forward by the coalition government. For TVP World in Prague, Andrew Sweeney.
This was a military event for the ages. Thousands of Allied troops with countless state-of-the-art equipment from almost a dozen countries joined NATO Dacian Fall military drill in Romania this Wednesday. The goal, seeing how fast European nations can get to Eastern Front in case of Russian aggression amid the recent announcement of U.S. troop reduction in Romania. Our very own Europe correspondent Alex Cadier took part in the exercises and has more on this impressive military display.
5,000 soldiers, 1,200 pieces of military equipment from 10 different nations, including France, Belgium, Romania, Bulgaria, Poland and others. This is what the defense of NATO's eastern flank here in Romania may look like. Of course, this Dacian Fall 2025 is an exercise. This is training to make sure these militaries can work together, but it is becoming increasingly real with that looming Russian threat in the region and with the withdrawal of some US troops positioned here in Romania announced in the last few weeks. You can see the Tiger attack helicopter from the French army behind me. It was part of this live fire exercise where they were attacking across a valley, clearly simulating what it might look like to defend these hills. Now, there was also a question of how quickly certain European militaries could get to the eastern flank, could get here to defend, be it Romania, Poland or other Eastern European countries. That was a big question, one that I put to Maxime Dutron, who's a French general in charge of getting the French forces here.
The thing that slowed us down was the deployment of our brigades. As we're in peacetime, our journey was slowed by administrative procedures because our military trains did not get priority to cross borders, so they waited 1 or 2 days. What we'd like is a kind of military Schengen, the capacity to deploy at all times in all European countries. It is a real need to put in place the defensive plans we have.
Now, officials here, be they Romanian or NATO officials, are very clear. This is an exercise, this is training to repulse and reject any possible threat on the eastern flank. They do not name Russia directly, but a few things point to that threat. Of course, the amalgamation of European nations really taking center stage here, but also some of the equipment. You have the César artillery gun, you have the LRU, also both from the French military, which have been donated to Ukraine and are used in Ukraine. So you have military capabilities used in Ukraine being practiced here by European nations. Although they don't say it officially, this exercise is looking straight at the Russian threat in the region. In Romania, I'm Alex Kadye for TVP World.
Over the course of the past year, the Serbian capital has seen its share of protests against government corruption in relation to the Novi Sad tragedy. But this time is different. A site once destroyed by a U.S. bomb in the 1990s and serving as a memorial could now become Trump Tower Belgrade, a luxurious hotel and apartment complex to be developed by a company belonging to the serving U.S. president and headed by his son-in-law. Pavel Trzaskowski uncovers the tensions and how the Serbian government is trying to overcome the will of its people in his latest report.
Over past year, Belgrade has gotten used to protesters in the streets, but this crowd is something quite new. They oppose turning this into this. Trump Tower Belgrade, a luxurious hotel and apartment complex. Its main problem is the proposed construction site, the former headquarters of the then Yugoslav General Staff, destroyed in the NATO bombings 26 years ago, and these bombings, designed to stop the war in Kosovo, were carried out by the United States.
I'm telling my friends right now that I've been inside this building. It's very emotional. I served in the army there for a few months, but I see this more generally as part of our cultural heritage, and we simply can't give that away.
To many Serbs, the building has served as a memorial to those killed in the NATO bombings.
There is no end to humiliation. This is something that undermines our national identity and disrupts the continuity of our culture and traditions. I think it is extremely humiliating, and we wonder where the limit is and where there is an end to it.
But instead of an end, it's more like a beginning. Last week, the Serbian parliament passed a law paving the way for the real estate project, which will be headed by Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner.
I ask you to support this law and take another step forward in the modernization of Serbia.
But a part of Serbian society remains unconvinced, to say the least. They join the crowd of anti-government protesters that have been taking to the streets for more than a year now, opposing the corruption and state capture of the ruling Serbian Progressive Party and the country's president, Aleksandar Vučić. But despite this pressure, Serbian leaders still prove they are able to shake hands and make deals with everyone. Pavel Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Erosion of economic stability is what Russia is experiencing now that its oil sector has not only become a target of continuous attacks from Ukraine, but also of U.S. sanctions, with a deadline for asset sales or settlement of liabilities set for November 21st. Countries scramble to find solutions to the issue of Russian energy presence on their territories. We will be speaking about this with Szymon Kardaś, Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. But first, Maciej Wilowski will tell us more on what the looming sanctions entail.
Romania and Bulgaria are scrambling to secure their energy supplies before U.S. sanctions on Russian oil kick in starting November 21st. Romania is moving to nationalize the Petrotel Lukoil refinery, which supplies the country with a quarter of its energy needs. The push toward nationalization, which only a few days ago was considered a last resort, comes after efforts to find a private buyer proved unsuccessful. A proposed offer by Swiss commodity trader Gunvor to buy Lukoil's foreign assets fell through last week after the U.S. called Gunvor a Kremlin puppet and refused to grant the company an operating license.
Basically, they need to get the license from the United States. And we saw that already what happened with Gunvor. A suitable buyer would need to be sanctions-free right now.
But nationalization of the refinery could pay off.
Taking control of Lukoil's refineries would be a move toward energy independence, certainly beneficial to them. It would allow them to safeguard domestic fuel supplies.
Romania's energy minister, Bogdan Ivan, said in a Facebook post on Wednesday that his country would not seek an exemption from Russian sanctions, a direct contrast to the approach taken by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. In Romania's neighbor to the south, the prospect of a fuel shortage is even more concerning. Bulgaria has just 1 month of energy supplies left, according to the chairman of the country's State Reserves Agency. The massive Lukoil-owned Neftochim refinery in Burgas, among the largest in the Balkans, supplies Bulgaria with 80% of its energy needs.
For Bulgaria, the refinery supplies about 80%, so a shutdown would quickly lead to shortages in gasoline, diesel.
To prevent a shutdown, the Bulgarian government passed legislation giving a state-appointed administrator control of the refinery, which could make it easier to nationalize the facility. With only 9 days to go before full U.S. sanctions are imposed, authorities in both Bulgaria and Romania are in a race against the clock to secure their energy needs. Maciej Wilowski for TVP World.
And just as promised, it is my pleasure to have Szymon Kardaś, Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, join me to uncover what's next for Europe in relation to U.S. sanctions on Russian oil and its impact on the economy. Thank you so much for joining me on World News Tonight.
Good evening. It's a pleasure.
So you co-authored a paper, Energy Reckoning, How Europe Can Use U.S. Sanctions to Cut Moscow's Oil Ties. I'm excited to have that conversation and have a deeper dive into how this is going to change the market. So the sanctions are meant to influence the external financial institutions, something that we've seen happen when it comes to the relationship with Rosneft and Lukoil. What was the sanctions impact so far? What has been the impact that we've seen and how it changed the economy here on the continent?
We have to wait what would be the final impact of sanctions because, the effectiveness of this instrument depends on, first of all, the determination to implement it, and it would be very important how Washington, to what extent Washington is determined to implement them. Secondly, it would be also interesting to see how Russia will try to circumvent sanctions, because they are under sanctions, different kinds of sanctions, for almost 4 years, and we know that they learned and they developed different kind of schemes, to circumvent it. And finally, how will Russian partners behave, in terms of helping them to circumvent them? So, yeah.
So we've seen, when it comes to Central and Eastern Europe, we've seen different movements take place over the past few days. We know that certain decisions are going to still be made. Do you think that this particular region is making those adjustments and making those changes and trying to introduce bills quick enough to be able to meet the deadline?
Well, actually there are big question marks, because first of all, we know that Hungary applied for the exemptions, regarding sanctions that were imposed by the US on Lukoil.
We also saw the comfort letter for Germany for 6 months.
This is the second case, exactly. We know that Bulgaria is actually also planning to submit a request for the exemption of sanctions. We know that only Romania actually is trying, to find a solution that would allow them to take control over Lukoil's assets, but without, asking for any exemptions from the U.S. side. So actually, those kind of moves raise big questions about the effectiveness, because actually we as Europeans should use those sanctions as a pretext to get rid of the Russian Federation and Russian oil companies from the European energy landscape. If countries start, to ask for exemptions, it can make the whole mechanism, not as effective as we expected it could be.
So you've mentioned Hungary. I would like to take a closer look at that, because we had the conversation taking place between President Trump and Viktor Orban, and you said that there is an exemption that's been secured. We know about a year. Viktor Orban says it might be longer, that there is no deadline. Do you think that Hungary actually has a real or an imaginary problem when it comes to removing Russian oil? Is there a will to remove Russian oil? We could look at the example of Croatia and Hungary potentially getting LNG from Croatia. So what kind of a dynamic are we looking at here?
Well, actually, the answer is very simple. There is a lack of political will. To change the policy towards Russia. Viktor Orban and Hungary, under Viktor Orban's ruling, is actually interested in keeping the energy ties with Russia in terms of the gas supplies, in terms of the oil supplies. And particularly the oil example is interesting, because Viktor Orban is arguing that there is no physical option for Hungary, to diversify the sources of supply, which is not true. We know that there is a pipeline connecting Hungary with Croatia, and they could import crude oil, using the Adria oil pipeline, and there is enough capacity to do it. So it's basically the lack of political will. We know.
But you mentioned, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you mentioned the lack of political will. We look at Mr. Trump, who actually said to NATO countries, he said to the European continent, you need to cut the ties when it comes to oil with Russia, when it comes to energy. And yet we have this conversation between the two, and all of a sudden Hungary gets the exemption.
Yeah, because Viktor Orban used a very strange argument that, well, since they do not have ports, they do not have access to LNG, for instance, when it comes to natural gas, or they cannot import oil, through ports. Because
you would think that Mr. Trump would actually have access to information.
And it's really bizarre, because actually, if Donald Trump was advised properly, about the current, the actual state of play when it comes to the situation of Hungary, he should know that there is a physical option for them actually to diversify. So so that's why I said that one of the key factors would be the US determination, to implement sanctions in a way that would really hurt not only the Russian companies, but also all other countries or companies from other countries that still tend to cooperate with Russians.
So we see, as I mentioned, different movements taking place in order to meet the deadline. But what role do you think Poland is going to play, considering that it has a diversified energy portfolio, it has a diversified infrastructure that could potentially provide for those gaps that are being made and left behind by the Russian oil sector? What do you think is going to be Poland's role?
Well, first of all, Poland is very credible, in terms of advocating for phasing out Russian fossil fuels in the European Union, because we managed to do it in terms of natural gas in 2022, thanks to the LNG terminal in Świnoujście, thanks to the construction of the Baltic pipeline, and thanks to many contracts that were signed, with suppliers, with non-Russian suppliers, let's put it this way. And in terms of crude oil, we managed to be completely independent in terms of supplies from Russia since 2023. So we are very credible, in terms of advocating for it. And of course, due to the infrastructure that is on the ground and the infrastructure that is coming, and due to the interconnectors that were constructed, between Poland and Germany, Poland and Lithuania, Poland and Slovakia, we are in a quite good position also to offer the surplus, for instance, of natural gas that is coming to Poland, to the neighboring countries and also to countries which are neighbors of our neighbors. So so Poland actually should present its strong voice on the European in the European Union and advocating for the implementation of sanctions and using sanctions as a good pretext, to speed up the process of phasing out Russian energy companies and Russian energy from the European landscape.
I'm aware that the time on our program is coming to an end slowly, but I wanted to ask you a very quick question right before we go. Do you think that there's still a way that Russia will actually manage to bypass, introduce some bypass strategy? I mean, we've seen the gun war who was trying to purchase Lukoil.
Yeah, quite quickly, but fortunately, I mean, in terms of in terms of Gunvor, the U.S. administration did not give consent, to approve the transaction, because, the idea was to sell all the foreign assets of Lukoil to Gunvor, which is actually a company closely linked informally to Russia and members of the Russian ruling elite. So it's absolutely clear that Russians will try to develop other schemes, to keep control over their assets. It's absolutely crucial for the US, but also for the European allies of the United States, to block any attempt to circumvent sanctions, because, they might hit Russians really hard, but whether they hit or not depends on the US and depends also on the Europeans and our determination, to implement them.
Thank you very much. Szymon Kardaś, Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you for joining me on the program.
Thank you for having me.
And this would be all the latest news for now, but don't go anywhere, because we have On the Record, where Adam Yasser interviews Annalena Baerbock, the President of the United Nations General Assembly. That's all from me now. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Thank you for joining me on the program, and I'll see you very soon.